Keir Starmer survived a near-death experience as far as his premiership was concerned, and then he hopped on a plane to Germany for the Munich Security Conference. We'll be discussing how the Prime Minister got through another turbulent week and what the implications of that conference were. I'm Frank McKenna, and this is the Downtown Den Politics Podcast.
The return of the sausages.
All sorts of things that I would have wanted as a kid that I couldn't have, right? Famously, Sky TV.
How'd that happen? I guess I just forgot what was going on.
They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats.
Yay, it worked.
Welcome back to the Downtown Den Politics Podcast with me, Frank McKenna, and this week it is just myself and Joe Phillips. So the dynamic duo will be looking after you this week. Jim Hancock is away, knocking on doors, campaigning for a new political party that he's trying to set up, bringing together Liberal Democrats, Tory Wets, and Lord knows who else he's after, Joe. But I'm sure he's having a good time wherever he's doing this, Mr. Hancock. And obviously, the big story of the week, as far as the domestic political scene was concerned, at least, was the fact that Keir Starmer finally, on Monday, survived in number 10. It looked at one point last week, after we'd recorded our podcast, that he was going to be forced to resign because, of course, we had the resignation of his press officer. This followed, of course, Morgan McSweeney's resignation over the weekend. So on the Monday, his press officer, remind me of his name, Joe, if you would.
Tim Allen.
Tim Allen, he went. Yeah. And then just after lunchtime, the Scottish Labour leader, Anna Samwar, called on the Prime Minister to resign. I think at that point, most of us thought, whoops, here we go, we're going to get a slew of resignations from cabinet members, and off he goes. Instead, we saw all of the cabinet, one by one, put out on X, and I do wonder why they're still using that platform, but they are, that they were supporting Keir Starmer to remain as Prime Minister. He then went off in the evening to apparently warm applause from the Parliamentary Labour Party, gave a barnstorming performance, and on we go. But, Joe, is it simply a stay of execution? We do have that Gorton by-election, of course, coming up next Thursday, and then the May elections, and you wonder whether the reason Starmer is surviving at this moment in time is more to do with the fact that nobody is an obvious alternative replacement, and of those alternative replacements, none of them really have their ducks in a row yet to mount a leadership challenge.
Yeah, and I don't think that is going to change after the by-election or the May elections. And I think Ed Miliband, who was sort of doing the media rounds last week, pretty much summed it up. We got to the precipice, looked over, didn't like what we saw, and came back again. And there are interesting commentators, people like Matthew Syed, who's a Conservative, and Danny Finkelstein, and various other people who are saying, we need Keir Starmer to stay. However dreadful it has been for him, but let's say he's in a better position now than he was a week ago. We need that stability. What is going on in the rest of the world is much more important, actually, than what's happening in the Labour Party. And I don't think the British public have got the appetite for, yet another leadership challenge. And, for all of his mistakes, I think Morgan McSweeney going might clear things up. And it might be that he has listened particularly to women in the Labour Party who are saying, you've got to be more inclusive, you've got to be more open, you've got to listen, and you've got to stop this boys' club. And actually, he certainly seems to have a bit more of a spring in his step. He also got rid of, by mutual agreement, Chris Wormold, who was the Cabinet Secretary, who he probably shouldn't have appointed because he was, by all accounts, rather dull and not very dynamic, so was not going to help with a huge programme of reform and instant government. But I think it goes back to what we were talking about last week, Frank. It's, the public have got to be a bit more grown up. If you want to face up to the threats of Russia, the threats of Trump, and everything else that's going on, we need stability. And however fragile that stability is, I mean, for goodness sake, he's got a walloping great majority. He's at the moment got the backing of the Labour Party in Parliament. And I think it's sort of factored in even before the Mandelson crisis, the fact that, Labour will probably lose the by-election because governments in midterm do tend to, because opposition parties can throw everything at it, but we'll see. And I think it's already been factored in that both Labour and the Tories will probably do quite badly in the May elections as well. So I think it is a stay of execution, but I think it's for longer than after the May elections.
Interesting. I think the problem he's going to have moving forward, and this was an issue even before the Mandelson scandal in a sense, is his lack of authority over that big parliamentary Labour Party that he has, because we've seen them try to take some tough decisions, most notably around the welfare reform bill, which they had to scrap. But they have made U-turn after U-turn. Winter fuel was another. Farmers' inheritance tax is another where they've had to tweak that. And so many times they come up with plans that appear to be in the national interest, but simply don't fit in with the Labour Party's agenda. And I think this is going to be a problem for them. And I think what some of the PLP need to remember, and perhaps Labour activists as well, is despite that landslide majority that they achieved it with 33% of the vote. They were not given the authority or a mandate to have a radical left-wing government. And although you, myself and Jim have all said over the past 18 months they need to be bolder in certain areas, I don't think this idea that Ed Miliband and others have come up with, that they need to be more left-wing, is either something that they have, as I say, a mandate for, or would necessarily be popular with the electorate. And if you look at the things that are starting to irritate Labour MPs, it's Shabana Mahmood's success in getting immigration down. We could be at a situation, incredibly, that by the end of the year, immigration stats will be at net zero. I mean, that's just an absolutely incredible achievement. Labour MPs not particularly happy with that. We know that Pat McFadden is working hard behind the scenes to come forward with some radical proposals around welfare to get people back into work. That ordinarily would be seen as a good thing for a Labour government to do. But a lot of Labour MPs are saying, no, it means cuts in benefits and we're not going to vote for that. So on the domestic agenda, I think they're going to struggle. And then we'll talk more detail about the international situation after the break. But equally, defence spending needs to go up. Don't know many Labour MPs who are massively interested in supporting that sort of approach either. So he may stay in office, Joe, but is he in power? That is the point, isn't it?
Well,
I think that is going to be something that I said this last week, who'd want to be Prime Minister? Who would want to be Prime Minister if you didn't actually have the power to do the things that you believed in and wanted to do?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the front runners, if you like, Wes Streeting and Angela Rayner, while they have some support, each camp is attacking the other one. So, that's not very helpful. And then you've got that sort of factionalism. But I think, if he has now changing the makeup of number 10, and if it is now more open, and if Morgan McSweeney is no longer there keeping the door closed to anybody, some of these conversations might make Labour MPs feel more comfortable if they feel they're being listened to. And I think part of the problem was that you'd got Labour MPs going, my constituents don't want their benefits cut, although, as you've always said, Frank, for every 1 in 5 that doesn't want the benefits cut, there are 4 in 5 who quite like it to be, because they're paying for it. But if you can get your message to the Prime Minister and he is seen to be and actively listening, then that does make it easier to bring the party with you. And there are some really tough decisions. I mean, he's been noticeable in being much more bold about our relationship with Europe. And again, we'll talk about that in the international section after the break. How lovely. But there are some other things, that are not very helpful at the moment. One is the peerage that he gave to Matthew Doyle, long time Labour communications bod, was working, for Tony Blair, then went to work for Tony Blair Global Institute and then came back. Do these people need peerages is the first question. And the second question is, how could it possibly be that nobody within that inner circle had noticed that Matthew Doyle had been actively campaigning and wearing a T-shirt supporting a person who's a convicted sex offender? And again, it goes back to this lack of curiosity, this lack of, hang on a minute, let's just double check, let's just look a little bit closer. That one, I think, is damaging. And of course, we've now got the story that's been running over the weekend, which is about this, Labour Together, which at the time was headed up by Josh Simon, now Cabinet Office Minister, but also run by Morgan McSweeney again, that employed some lobbying company to basically discredit and dismiss and discredit really good journalists in the Sunday Times who had raised very legitimate questions about the funding of Labour Together. And of course, Labour Together was the mechanism, if you like, that helped Keir Starmer become leader of the Labour Party. So there are really big questions about that. And I would think that, today Parliament's in recess. If Josh Simons has got any sense and wants to have a future in government, he should just quietly resign and say, that was awful. It was on my watch. Thank you very much. I'm sorry. And move on. Because this is where they get it wrong. These things happen. They think, either it'll go away or they can talk their way out of it. And that's where I think the public just go, for God's sake, stop trying to argue your way into a deeper hole.
Yeah. I mean, on this particular issue of Labour Together paying £38,000 to a private investigator to investigate journalists, if that doesn't pass any sniff test, as far as I'm concerned, and the defence, which is, the report was far more detailed than we anticipated, is no defence whatsoever. What made you think that it was a good idea to pay a private investigator to look into the affairs of a journalist? That is absolutely incredible. And if it was from the right wing, we would be jumping up and down, rightly, absolutely, and saying this is an attack on the freedom of the press. And so I don't think that Josh Simons should be in post now. I think immediately he should have been told by the Prime Minister, you've got to go. And it does cause a problem then to that Labour Together brand. Labour Together, basically a bit like Fabian Society, or back in the day, the Labour Coordinating Committee, who come up with policies, but also in this instance, as you rightly say, Joe, was the main vehicle to support Keir Starmer's leadership bid when Jeremy Corbyn resigned 4, 5, 6 years ago, whenever it was. So that's potentially a big story if Josh Simon decides to try and dig in. I think also the guy Matthew Doyle, who you mentioned as well, what a stupid miss that was. And I think it's these obvious mistakes that are being made, these own goals continuously happening, that do make people question Keir Starmer's politics and his political judgment, and will continue to do so as these stories emerge. And of course, more problematic, I think, for him is going to be not the by-election or the May election results, which you rightly say, Joe, have been baked in anyway, as going to be pretty dire. And if you listen, they could scrape a win in Gorton because of the Manchester Labour machine, right? So we'll see. But ultimately, he's then got to sit and he'll be praying that nothing too embarrassing comes out of the release of all the Mandelson papers. But again, in my experience, and I'm sure yours, Joe, if you release that amount of documentation into the ether, there is always going to be a couple of lines, and inevitably, in the febrile political climate we're in, those are the things that people are going to hone in on, and that might eventually see him off.
Yeah, well, I think there are genuine questions about his judgment. And I think, as we've said before, it comes back to the fact that he hasn't got political antennae that make him go, hang on a minute, how's this going to play in the dog and duck or outside the playground gates, And if you're surrounded by people who are hell-bent on power at any cost and repelling any rebels, you're never going to hear the voice that goes, hang on a minute, this is ridiculous. It's a bit like when we're going into the last leg now of the COVID inquiry. But when you think how utterly ridiculous it was that people could play golf or go shooting, but children couldn't use playgrounds, and I know this is, I keep saying it, but lots of other people are saying it as well. If you'd have had a woman in the room that was being listened to, they would have gone, hang on a minute. What's going to happen to all these kids who can't go to school? What's going to happen to, victims of domestic violence and so on and so forth? I mean, Keir Starmer needs a big win of some sort, but there isn't one on the horizon, actually. And I think, unfortunately, because of the delay in these things and because people can access timelines, the stuff about Matthew Doyle was known before the peerage was rubber stamped, and you just think, for God's sake, this comes to light and you just go, really sorry, Matthew, you've done great service to the Labour Party, but we're withdrawing it. Why go ahead? And similarly, this whole thing with the Sunday Times journalist, well, Labour together, Josh Simons, McSweeney and all the others must have known, because they must have signed off.
Well, someone signs a cheque for £38,000.
Exactly. So do they think that by investigating journalists, it's never going to come to light? I mean, how daft. It's just so basically stupid.
It is incredible. I mean, I don't know Matthew Doyle, so I've got no dog in the fight. I've got nothing against the guy personally, and part of me has a degree of sympathy for him, because you tend to go out and campaign for people who you've got to know through the Labour Party. You don't do any due diligence on them if you're knocking on doors and sticking leaflets through doors. I've never gone to the point of wearing a T-shirt supporting a council candidate, I have to say. Nor I didn't ask people to do that when I was running as council candidate. Although if I thought I could get away with it, I may have done. Nonetheless, that unfortunate situation that he's found himself in is just something that prime ministers who are appointing to the Lords cannot ignore. No. And the fact that Starmer and his team have, I think, says an awful lot around the culture of that place, where they just thought, well, we can get away with it. And you take this right back 18 months, 19 months to the free suits, the free specs, the clothes for Victoria Starmer, his wife, and you think again, where was the political nous? And I know for a fact, Joe, that there were people within Labour HQ, females, saying this doesn't look good. There is no, and again, no reason whatsoever why that should have happened. No reason for Matthew Doyle to appointed to the Lords. There's loads of Labour activists out there who've put good service into the party, who'd happily go onto the red benches if they were asked. So there was no need. He hasn't got any particular huge skill set that would say, oh, well, he would have added a great deal with the weight of his mind and his brain. Well, that's not Matthew Doyle from everything I've been told about him. And similarly with the free clothes and the free specs and all that crisis that emerged and controversy, simply put the money through the party and let the party pay.
Yeah,
that was all that needed to be done. So we're not even saying these things are going to impact in any negative way, but it's the decision-making process. And then, as you rightly say, Joe, and you've said this for months and months now, how they then handle the situation. It looks as though this one with the journalists could be the latest mini crisis that blows into something big.
Yeah, and actually, you just nip it in the bud. You go, it was absolutely awful, and Josh Simons has to take the rap for it. You know, he was there at the time. He'll come back into government if he's good enough, and you just get on and do your job. But you move it away and you move it on and you concentrate on other things. I mean, I thought it was very interesting. The Scottish Labour leader, Anna Sawa, who obviously it was a bit like kids playing knockdown ginger, wasn't it? Go on, you do it, and I'll be right behind you. And he turned around and they'd gone behind the garden wall. That, you know, okay, you're going to distance yourself from somebody that you've supported. You're going to distance yourself from Mandelson, who you supported, in the hope, that you might cling on to a few seats in the May elections in Scotland. And he made himself look absolutely stupid. And I think, you know, in some ways it was probably quite a good thing, probably not for Scottish Labour, but I think it was quite a good thing because nobody did follow him, and they all, as you said, you know, they all came together and went, yeah, no, it's okay, we really like him, see ya, bye.
Yeah. Well, I wondered whether somebody from Starmer's team had been conspiratorially saying to him, if you do it, somebody else will come out and it'll have the domino effect.
Well, I don't think they're that sophisticated.
No, sadly not. But I think it definitely helped Starmer. That definitely helped Starmer, and probably rather than send him over the edge, which is what everyone suspected at the time that the announcement was made. I was listening to the news thinking, oh, this is disastrous for number 10.
Yeah.
It actually rallied people, as you say, and got them to where he needed to get them to. Just wonder about some of the analysis afterwards and some of the lessons that some of Labour's cabinet members and others seem to be taking from the government's travails at the moment. And Ed Miliband, you mentioned, did the morning round on the Tuesday after all this drama had unfolded and Keir had gone off and, as I say, rallied the troops in Parliament. Hey, how many times have we heard this? You know, it was the real Keir unleashed. If we could just see more of this Keir Starmer. Well, we've had that almost as many times as we've heard about resets within the government. So let's see. But Ed Miliband seemed to be saying, well, was saying, what we need is Labour to be more left-wing. And I've had conversations this week with a number of people from the Labour Party and gone through some of the policies that they've introduced over the last 19 months. So we now have the highest taxes that we've ever had in the UK. That includes, of course, that big hike in employers' national insurance contributions, which is still hurting business and still hurting the job markets. We've had big hike and rise in the national minimum wage, including for 16 to 18-year-olds, which is stopping employers taking on 16 to 8-year-olds. So surprise, surprise, we've seen a spike in unemployment. We've seen the removal of the 2-child benefit cap. We've seen breakfast clubs introduced into schools. Great move by Bridget Phillips, and something that I would absolutely welcome. You've seen a U-turn on winter fuel allowance. You've seen a U-turn on welfare benefit reform. And you saw a U-turn on the farmers' inheritance tax. How more left-wing do you want the government to be? I just think that what they need is a communications plan that enables them to get the messages out of those things that I've listed. And there's others that they've achieved as well. But of course, they're overwhelmed by the noise of the Westminster fluff. And think about the things that we're talking about, Joe. We're talking about an appointment to the US ambassador's job, which at the time everybody knew was a risk, but thought it was a risk worth taking because of Trump and the White House. We're talking about an appointment of somebody who had an unfortunate friendship with a sex offender to the Lords. And now we're talking about Labour together paying an investigative journalist, a private investigator, to investigate an investigative journalist. none of these are policy issues. None of these are things where they're saying, oh, he's got it badly wrong on this particular policy, or he's got it bad. It's all to do with lack of political intuition, lack of sense and common sense in terms of how he handles the politics. And I'm not sure still whether or not he's going to get that right. But what may save him is surrounding yourself with better people. Just tell me about the woman that's being tipped to take over from Wormald, and then the preposterous attacks that have taken place on her from the right-wing media, which simply means to me she'd be good for the job.
Yeah. Well, so this woman is Antonia Romeo, and she's currently at the Home Office, and she was tipped to be the Cabinet Secretary. She's widely respected, but she isn't Sir Humphrey. You know, she was in New York. She was working out there, and she was our consul. And she, good heavens, she hosted parties with people like Anna Wintour of Vogue and top models and Joanna Lumley and British Fashion Week and all of those sort of things. So, you know, nobody, all those men in suits, harumph, think it's awful. Apparently, she's quite pleasant and flirty and likes to party. Good heavens above. She sounds like a human being.
She should come and work for Downtown.
Well, yeah, absolutely. But you just sort of think, okay, and she's got there, you know, pushing her way through glass ceilings and Sir Humphreys and furled umbrellas and bowler hats and things. So she's been a civil servant for 25 years, widely respected, but obviously was turned down by Keir Starmer's inner group and him when he appointed Chris Wormald, and everybody went, really? You want to get stuff done? You put him there, you know, he's the, yes, well, we'll go away and write a report and all the rest of it. So that was bound to end in tears. Now, the person who's come out and criticised her is Lord MacDonald, who used to be top civil servant at the Foreign Office when she was working in New York for the Foreign Office. Everybody else, you know, including former cabinet secretaries, high ups in the civil service and everywhere. And bearing in mind, she's a civil servant, so she cannot defend herself or speak publicly, has said, this is ridiculous. There was one single complaint. It was investigated in 2017 and it discovered there was no case to answer. And I'm sorry, but it reeks to me of, you know, blokes in suits trying to protect their club. And actually, it would be a great loss for the Home Office if she does go to number 10, but she's currently sharing it with 2 other people until a permanent appointment is made. Now, you know, either Keir Starmer has got the gumption to go, yes, sod it. She's got a great record. I'm going to talk to everybody who's worked with her, and I'm going to, you know, use my judgment, and I'm going to ask other people like Harriet Harman or Lucy Powell or Angela Rayner or whoever and appoint her. Or is he going to go, no, I feel much more comfortable with a man in a suit who won't do anything? Because he's really got the opportunity to change things. And it's all about communications, as you say, Frank. And I think, you know, the media has to take some responsibility, because it's a lot easier to create a story without moving out of your seat in the press gallery around a stupid appointment of somebody that most people have never heard of, who might or might not have done something dodgy 25 years ago, than it is to actually examine policy, talk to people who are affected by it, and have proper grown-up conversations. So I think the media, and I know, you know, we're all under pressure to keep feeding that voracious beast of the 24-hour news cycle, but actually we need to be a bit more sensible. And as Jim and I have often bemoaned, you know, there are no Whitehall correspondents anymore. There are very few local papers that have got local government reporters, apart from, you know, big cities like Manchester and Birmingham and Bristol. So, you know, you're really left at this headline and this, you know, Twitter feed of outrage and angst and stuff. But it goes back, as you rightly say, to the thing of thinking, hang on a minute, let's think this through. How is this going to look? If we think it's going to look bad, let's not do it. If we've already committed, let's deal with it now rather than hope it goes away. And I just think there is an arrogance, and I don't think Keir Starmer is arrogant, But there is an arrogance in that attitude of, oh, don't worry, it's nothing, it's flim-flam. It's not flim-flam for people who are trying to keep their businesses afloat, because to them, this growing sense that nobody's held accountable, people can get away with bad behavior, that, morality and decorum has gone out of the window. And yes, I mean, there may be worse that comes out of the Mandelson files. There's also the whole Prince Andrew thing, although that doesn't actually affect Keir Starmer. But, we are in the middle of a sort of a minor bubbling constitutional crisis, actually. And this is a perfect opportunity for him to go, right, I'm really boring, but what you need is really boring. But look, I've got these party animals around me who can get stuff done, Yeah,
get a grip is basically what we're saying. And it's the chaos
Yeah.
that feels as though the country is out of control in a sense. Now, I think that is way over the top in terms of a narrative, but it's the one that the right-wing press in particular are trying to sell, and it's not aided or abetted when you have these minor issues, which of course the media will blow up into big crises if you allow them to, and if you've not got an alternative story to tell. And this is why he does need to make sure that I think this is his last chance saloon. He's got to get people in and around him at number 10 who do all of the things that you've outlined, Joe, who start to basically make that machine work for him rather than against him, and be able to have a facilitated conversation on a regular basis with his backbench MPs, because without them, you're not going to be able to get your programme through. So let's hope he can achieve that. We'll see over the next month or so whether that's going to be possible. And of course, we'll know by this time in a fortnight what that Gorton by-election result is going to be. So Keir Starmer still in a bit of trouble, I would suggest, not out of the woods yet. But the big thing, and we said it last week, I think, there's no obvious alternative, and that will certainly help him in his quest to continue in 10 Downing Street. Well, after he survived the brush with near death as Prime Minister, Sir Keir got on a plane and went off to Munich for the big international defence conference there. Lots of interesting happenings. We'll be discussing that after this short break. Stay with us. Back in a moment.
Hi, I'm Stephen Hesketh, CEO of Savvy Hotels, owner of the Hospitality Hero and co-owner of DivaFest. And I'm here today to share with you our great event that's coming up in collaboration with Downtown and Business, which is the Great Art of Hospitality Conference, happening on the 26th of February in Manchester City Centre at the Treehouse Hotel. This event will bring the creme de la creme of hospitality all in one room. We're looking at 200 individuals coming together to listen to the great operators in hospitality, but likewise some political big hitters to also question them on all things hospitality. We can't wait to see you there. Tickets will be on sale very, very soon via the website, and look forward to seeing you there.
Welcome back to the second part of this week's Downtown Den Politics podcast with me, Frank McKenna, and Joe Phillips this week. Jim Hancock is absent without leave, but sure he'll be back with us. Not sure next week, actually, possibly the week after. But Joe, as I was saying before the break, Keir Starmer survived his near-death experience as far as his prime ministership was concerned, hopped on a plane and went to the Munich Security Conference, where of course all the talk was about how stable our relationship is or isn't nowadays with the United States. Now, Secretary of State Rubio was obviously a bit more reasonable than J.D. Vance was last year, when he basically accused all the European countries of being dictatorships and wanting to kill free speech. But nonetheless, the underlying message from him was Europe needs to start to look after itself, defend itself, start to spend more money on its defence. And that message was certainly taken on board by Macron, Schulz and Starmer, and they all sort of come together, put this communique out that said, yeah, we need to work much more closely as far as defence is concerned, and of course we need to listen to Marco Rubio, and we need to start to look at increasing our defence spending. That's been said now for many years, Joe. Not really happened, and you do wonder whether when they're making these statements they've got their fingers behind the back crossed, saying, well, Trump's only going to be there for another 2 years, surely we can survive that. I don't think that whoever gets into the White House next time is going to have a different view in terms of defence spend and insisting that Europe begins to pick up a larger part of the tab, because this actually has been a discussion and a debate since probably Obama, if not before. So they do need to crack on, Joe, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to Kennedy in the 1960s. You know, it is not something new. It's just that Trump's lot are much more aggressive and rude about it. You know, Rubio, who is, as you say, you know, slightly more amenable and tried to be more pleasant than JD Vance, who basically just came and attacked Europe. There's something fundamental about this American administration, that they don't like Europe. They don't get it because it's old and it's crumbly and it's got lots of different languages and peculiar customs and things. And isn't it much safer just to go to Disneyland and you can look at the Leaning Tower of Pisa or the canals of Venice and you don't have to worry about the realities? And they don't get, you know, the thousands of years of history and wars and, you know, all of that sort of stuff. So that's a cultural gap that I think, you know, will never, ever be bridged, really. But Trump's lot have made it much more aggressive, and they are, frankly, rude. And talking of rude, have you ever seen anything more disgusting than the display by Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, you know, in court as Trump's Attorney General? I'm sorry, I'm just going off on a bit of a sidebar here. With Epstein survivors and their lawyers in the court, she wouldn't look them in the eye, and she behaved like a 3-year-old having a temper tantrum. I mean, you know, we think things are bad in this country when people behave badly, but that was just beyond the pale. It was embarrassing. But I think you're right. And actually, you know, there is a sort of a not very neat, but there is a segue. If you look at the people around Trump, they will still be there when he's gone, and they are more dangerous, particularly people like Stephen Miller and JD Vance and Pete Hegseth and all of these peculiar women who seem to be, you know, Amazon Barbies. Let's be as rude as we possibly can and as obnoxious as we possibly can. So the idea that we can just sit there and go, oh, it'll be fine, let's just talk tough, and Trump will be gone, it's not real. And anyway, you know, we do need to look to our own defence. You know, we're talking right now, Frank, it's cold. In Ukraine, it's -25. They haven't had electricity, they haven't had heating, they haven't had lighting, they haven't had water. And this is going on and on and on. How far is Ukraine, you know, from Poland? How far is Ukraine from Germany? How far is Ukraine from the Scandinavian states? I mean, it is just on our doorstep. And we all thought it would be over in a flash, probably Putin more than anybody else. But it's still going on. And if that is not the wake-up call to all of Europe. But the other thing, you know, the silver lining, if there is one, in this talk of war, is that actually it is the perfect opportunity for Keir Starmer, who does do much better internationally, to say, right, our future is so clearly with Europe. We need a European defence force. We need to pull together, pool our assets, pool our defence resources, which, as he said in his speech at Munich, you know, we've got more in Europe than America's got, actually. So let's not be shy about it. Let's be tough, and then say to the British public, okay, it's 10 years since the referendum, but look what's happened. 2 terms of Donald Trump and war in Ukraine. So what do you want? Hope that everything gets better with America? or let's be sensible. And again, it comes back to this thing about you've got to look to the future. And I think he could do that right now.
Yeah, I think I love the quote about Amazonian Barbies. I'm glad I didn't say it. I'd have got into a lot of trouble, wouldn't I? Francesca, our producer, would have been telling me off. But you can get away with it, Joe. So thanks for that. It's a great comment. Yeah, I think that the problem that all prime ministers in this country have, over the past decade, maybe longer, is that people don't want to spend money on defence, and people certainly don't want to go and fight for the country. And so I think we have a very different view of defence than we did even 30 years ago. And that sort of bulldog spirit that we used to associate with the Brits, I think may have gone, if not forever, then certainly for the moment. And I don't know whether that's simply because we've become complacent in a country which, as an island, has been largely untouched since 1945, other than some atrocious terrorist attacks, of course. Whether people's mindset is differently now and they just don't think the country is worth fighting for, well, that's fine, but be careful what you wish for, because the alternative, just look across to places like Russia, for example. And I think the other thing, though, is that where do you get the money from is the big question, isn't it? And the big spending tab, where you could actually go and attack it and get a significant amount of cash and put into defence, will be the welfare budget. Yeah. It's going to be 400 billion by the end of this parliament. Well, that's a ridiculous amount to be spending on benefits. Whatever your politics are, you can't think that that's a good idea, nor can you think that's sustainable. So the sooner they start to chip away at that and get that money diverted into defence, the better. Whether or not there's an opportunity for Rachel Reeves to do more borrowing in the same way that the Germans have, but of course their level of debt is nowhere near what ours is, so I'm not sure how flexible our finances are as far as that's concerned. But the big thing, and again comes back to that word communication, is to try and explain to people what a dangerous place we are living in at this moment in time. And it's not necessarily going to be Russia dropping bombs on us, or nuclear attacks. I mean, God forbid, we're all finished then if that happens. But it's the stuff that they've already done. It's hacking Jaguar Land Rover and putting a big car manufacturer out of business for 12 weeks, which had a huge impact, not just on the company, but on all its supply chain as well. It's all the shenanigans going on in our seas at the moment, where Russian submarines apparently are trying to get to the cables in the sea to cut our internet cable and our satellites and all that sort of thing. We are so reliant on technology now that it's that sort of attack that we actually need to be defending ourselves from. And if you listen to, and I know advisors, civil servants from every department will say to you, we need more money. But I do think that when you've got the joint chiefs from the United Kingdom and other European allies saying, we're going to have to start to take this a bit more seriously, guys. You've got to listen, Joe, and that will mean, as I say, a significant uplift in cash. And it doesn't necessarily mean more tanks or more nuclear warheads, but it does mean a far more sophisticated defence mechanism to protect all of those things I've talked about and more. And we laughed, didn't we, 2 years ago nearly now, when Rishi Sunak suggested that we needed to bring conscription back. I tell you, I don't think we're too far away from that, because the army is failing to recruit enough people. And if we are under the serious threat that we are being told that we're under, and it looks as though we're under when you look at the geopolitical world as we see it at the moment, what alternative a government's going to have? We won't be the only ones. In fact, in other European countries, it already happens. Again, I wonder whether, Mrs. Smith and Mr. Jones are going to be particularly happy when the letter's coming through the door to their 18, 19, 20-year-old son saying, right, time for your stint in the army. But I think that's the direction of travel, Joe.
Yeah, and I think we've got to start having a proper grown-up conversation about it. And I think Keir Starmer can do it. I think John Healey can do it. I think, all the cabinet can do it. And I think actually what Keir Starmer should probably think of doing is getting Kemi Badenoch and Ed Davey and the leaders of the SNP and Plaid Cymru into a room, and possibly even Farage as well, and say, look, we need to be really serious. We're on a war footing. And you're absolutely right. I mean, the attacks from cybersecurity, I do find it hilarious in a way that when the internet went out in Iran for 3 or 4 days, closed down by the Ayatollahs, an awful lot of social media traffic about the SNP mysteriously just dried up. Now, don't you find that astonishing that, in Iran, they're trying to overthrow the government, but they're really focused on the SNP? Who knew? Paisley and Persia, there's obviously a link there. But I just think, people need, all of us, we need to be much more aware of what we're buying, what we're doing. We've spoken before about the stuff that we buy from China at the same time as going, oh, we shouldn't be doing any business with China. Hang on, I've got an Amazon delivery coming, We need to get fitter, healthier. We need to look at things like food security. We need to look at getting our young people into if half of them can't go to work or don't go to school because they're anxious, well, God help us if they have to go and fight a war. But actually, what you really need is to say to people, it's not going to be tanks rolling up your high street. We need really smart computer scientists. We need really smart analysts. We need people who can do logistics. So start training people to do that. And I'm sure that, 5 or 6 years ago, there were probably kids in Ukraine who were sitting there scrolling on their phones, looking at daft items on YouTube, who are now either dead or fighting. So, I think people probably would, but I do think it's a time to call out, the plastic patriots who fly their Chinese flags upside down halfway up a lamppost and go, well, are you ready to fight? Are your kids ready to fight? Because that's what's coming. Are you ready to say no to the comfort zone that you live in? Because, we can't ignore it's coming. It's a bit like a weather warning, but we sort of need to get people aware without frightening people. And I think it's really important that the government focuses on 2 things. One is our future relationship with Europe, and for the moment, bugger America. They're there, but you can't change it from 1 minute to the next because Trump changes his mind every 5 minutes. And the other thing is to focus on young people and actually be tough, say to pensioners, right, we're cutting the triple lock. That money instead is going to be hypothecated, and it is going to be used to train kids in these vital skills to get us ready for the future. And I think, it's a very tough call, but if you're not honest with people, when things go wrong, and it doesn't take long, you knock out the ATMs, you knock out, air traffic control, you knock out motorway services, you disrupt fuel supplies, everybody suffers. And given that we've got so many companies like the water companies that can't actually manage to get clean water to houses, don't think anybody's going to come in riding to the rescue. Let's focus on what really matters. And actually, by giving that focus, it might make people think, do you know what? I'm not really that fussed about Matthew Doyle or, some civil servant I've never heard of.
Yeah. Yes. Well, let's hope, Joe. Let's hope. We'll see. And as you say, performs well on the international stage. Did again this week in Munich. Was very warmly received by his European allies, and did talk very much in favour of a much closer relationship between the UK and the EU, as did the Chancellor this week in a speech which was underreported in my view, where she was saying a trade deal is the #1 priority for the government as far as our relationship with the European Union is concerned. So let's hope they can start to turn things around and get things right. So that's it from us this week. It's been a breeze without Mr. Hancock. We've probably done it with under an hour, have we, Francesca? She will tell me later.
But we've missed the history slot, though.
We've missed the history. Yeah, we've missed the history slot, and we've missed the bright pink or bright turquoise jumper. But he'll be back in a couple of weeks. We won't miss him too much. Thanks, Joe. Great for your company as ever, and thanks to everybody who is listening today. Have a good week, and we'll see you next Monday.